I love me some Super Mario Odyssey, but this is too realistic for me. I need something flatter and more basic. I got just the game for you, without all the trauma. Alright, well, which of all these games do you want? I don't care, give me any of them, they're all basically the same anyway. 2D Mario games have been around since the very beginning of Nintendo being a game developer. With the original as a launch title for the NES, nearly every console since has one to call its own. And they give so many different and exciting ways to play the exact same game and waste $1,000 while acting like they're all so creative. Life sure is expensive as a Nintendo fan. Hopefully I can keep my funds up to keep buying these games and don't have to resort to any drastic measures soon. 2D Mario games have a lot of similarities between the titles because, I mean, let's be honest, they all have the exact same formula. Move from left to right, reach the flagpole, collect some random bullshit for crazy completionists like myself, and murder a turtle over and over again. Rated E for everyone, kids. Despite the games seeming like they're all the same, a lot of the older games do have their own flair and style, which makes them feel different. And then they just stopped doing that. With so many entries in the series, everyone is going to have their favorites and least favorites, so that's where I come in. I'm here to make everyone angry with my horrible opinions, so why not rank one of the most recognizable series of games of all time, especially with a new entry in the series coming out just last year. Before we do jump in though, I do want to preface which games I'll be ranking. I will not be ranking any remakes, remasters, re-releases, or ports. They will all count as the same game. So for example, Super Mario Bros. 2 and 3 along with Mario World and Yoshi's Island were all remade for the GBA under the Super Mario Advance series. But since they are all mostly the same game just on the Game Boy Advance, they will count for their main original title. If there are any major differences for a re-release, it will count for the game, but it won't be a completely separate entry. Does that make sense? I hope so. I've had enough angry mobs storm my house and I can't handle another. Alright, so without further ado, let's go ahead and rank every 2D Mario game. I know what you're thinking. Why am I even including Super Mario Run? Because I know there will be that one commenter that will start a revolution in the comments saying that my list is invalid because I didn't include it. So to appease the crazies, Super Mario Run is the worst 2D Mario game and I don't think that's a controversial opinion. It's a mobile game, so it's not even on a console and doesn't have the level design or game length that the main games have. Plus, you don't even control Mario's movements and just control his jumps. So can you really even consider this controlling him when all you do is just tap the screen, which makes it the most boring game to play? You can do this while half paying attention and doing literally anything else. If you were mad at me for putting Mario Run at the bottom of this list, well, buckle up because you're probably going to be even madder later on. Speaking of short games, next on the list we have Super Mario Land for the Game Boy. This game majorly suffers from the console that it was released on. Being the first handheld 2D Mario game, it was made as a simple experience for fans to be able to play on the go. And for what it is a fun experience. It's just too bad that experience is over in about 30 minutes. I love some of the things this game does differently. Saving Daisy from Sarasaland was a great switch up from always saving Peach. There are enemies that hadn't been seen before or since in some cases. The Super Ball flower provides a unique power-up which I just thought was a fire flower as a kid, but I mean, can you really blame me? How the f am I supposed to be able to tell that this is different when this is basically in black and white? Plus, I was like 5 and I wore glasses, and if I make even more excuses, will you finally believe me? Tatanga as the main villain is something we need more of. I love Mario games that don't just have Bowser as the final boss, which is why I adore a lot of the Mario RPG games. Even the fight itself being in a plane makes it feel way more unique than just running under Bowser and touching an axe. I just wish the game wasn't so dirt easy and short because this could have been much higher on the list. But because of its lack of content, I really can't justify putting it any higher. Here's something you never see: Evan ranking the first game in a series near the bottom of the list. Who could have seen this coming? Everyone. Let's start with what this game does right. It literally introduced basically everything that every game did after this. 8 worlds with varying levels and enemies that have become some of the most iconic in gaming history. Classic music that everyone knows, and introducing arguably the most famous video game villain ever too is a lot of the reason why this game is so well known. But this game is also from 1985, so it is heavily dated due to the hardware. These controls aren't as smooth as they could be, but don't get me wrong, for holding a brick with buttons, it's impressive it doesn't control that badly. Despite the game having 8 worlds, the levels don't really feel all that different from each other. There are some differences like different enemies and platforms or even underground, but for the most part, every level feels like you could just be in the same world. The only power-ups are the mushroom and firefly, which just limits so much gameplay possibilities and level design since everything needs to revolve around those two. Also the boss fights. It's just Bowser every single time, and the only differences are that he throws hammers and breathes fire. There is no reason a final boss should be able to be beaten in 3 seconds seconds by a child, yet that's what happened with me. Let's ignore I died to Bowser in World 4 like 17 times. All in all, this game introduced so much, which it definitely deserves credit for, but it didn't bring the ingenuity or ideas later entries added. Now it's time for the evil stepchild of the franchise, the only game that makes me question my sanity and consider treason. I'd almost rather play this! The Lost Levels is basically the first game, just created by an evil corporation that doesn't give a shit about you and wants you to suffer while continuing to give them money. So, it's a Nintendo game. This game is notorious for being one of the hardest Mario games ever created, and it deserves that reputation. This game is some bullshit all over it, and not the fun kind of bullshit, but the want to tear your hair out and injure yourself type of bullshit. Disclaimer, ThePowerBauer does not condone violence of any kind. Unless you think you found a mushroom only to die because it was a poison mushroom, then violence is all allowed. The one thing I will give this game credit for is that it is technically the first to give Luigi its higher jump and slippery shoes, which has been a staple in many games since. So that's one thing this game did right. Still more than Mario Run. Damn, that game was bad. The reason I have this higher than the original is because it's literally the original game just on hard mode, so to me personally, that makes it a better game. It's not better if you suck at games, and I can't admit that, so I have to put it above the original. Now it's time for the real Super Mario Bros. 2. This is the most unique and unusual of all the NES and Super Nintendo Mario games, and as we all know, I love games that change up a franchise's formula. I also hate it, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. This was the first game to have the option to play as more than just Mario and Luigi with the additions of Peach and Toad, the same character selection as 3D World minus the giant space princess. Each character has their own playstyle and allows for so many different ways to play and complete levels. This was the best addition this game made in my opinion, which is saying a lot considering this game introduced Wart. How can you not love a giant fat frog? Everyone knows this game was based on Doki Doki Panic and was just given Mario characters to release in the West since they thought we were all pussies and couldn't handle the lost levels. They were right, but that's not the point. The level designs are the most unique of any of the original Super Mario Bros. Games, and honestly, you could make the argument this game is better than Super Mario Bros. 3 if you're a fucking lunatic. The actual gameplay really makes this the black sheep of the series since you can't jump on enemies and instead grab and throw them, along with the screen being able to scroll from right to left and even vertically, which was unheard of at the time. The thing is though, it was still an NES game, and as you can see, I have a moral opposition to that console. I'm just kidding, but it really limited the total content of the game since there were only 20 total levels, which is basically like 2 worlds in the new games. Let's follow up the first Super Mario Bros. 2 with the second Super Mario Bros. 2. The new Super Mario Bros. Games are notorious for doing the same thing over and over without adding much new content, and in my opinion, New Super Mario Bros. 2 is the absolute worst of the 4 games. Just take the content those other 4 games have and remove any creativity they have and replace them with millions of coins. That's this entire game's personality. Just throw shiny coins in front of you and hope it distracts you from how basic and bare bones this game really is. Joke's on you, Nintendo, I can't be distracted that easily. Hey, they're selling Waluigi for Smash shirts outside. I gotta be first in line! The level design is fine. I mean, it's a 2D Mario game. I don't think any of them have bad levels, but nothing stands out to me or is memorable. The game did do one thing right, and that was bring back Reznor, as this was his only appearance outside of Mario World, and that makes me very happy that they did that. But then they counteracted that by making the Koopalings the bosses of every world. Why the hell couldn't you just make something unique? Literally, the previous New Super Mario Bros. Game used the Koopalings for each world. Did they think that's why the game sold well? It was on the fucking Wii, of course it was gonna sell well. New Super Mario Bros. 2 was the beginning of every game adding the Koopalings this era, and I will forever blame it for making them so annoying. It was fine the first time, but the fact that almost every game now has them makes them overused and uninspired. The game does add 3 special worlds, but why aren't there 8 normal worlds to begin with? There were only 6 for some reason, which is something that never made sense to me since the DS, Wii, and Wii U games all had 8 normal worlds. But whatever, I've ranted enough about this trash game. Following the most basic Mario game on Nintendo's most basic console, we got one of the most impressive games of its era. Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins is one of the most impressive games on the original Game Boy, and miles better than Super Mario Land. The game actually looks like a Mario game and not a bunch of squiggles that you need to squint to even sort of see what it looks like. Oh yeah, I think that's Mario. Dude, you're playing Tetris. I love some of the things this game did differently, like the addition of special games to gain lives and power-ups instead of just getting a life for 100 coins, as well as being the first handheld Mario game with an overworld map instead of just jumping from level to level in the original. This feels like a Super Mario Bros. 3 or World extension on the handheld, while the original had much more in common with the first Mario Bros. The levels have a nice variety, and unlike the original, there's more than 30 minutes of gameplay with 32 levels, including the best level, getting to jump in Mario's balls. Really really want to know what drugs the developers were taking when creating this level. What ideas does everyone have for the new game we're making? What about pulling Mario's pants down and going into his crotch to touch his testicles? Perfect! Just what the kids want! The game is still held back by being on the Game Boy, but for the time, this is one of the better 2D Mario games, and I don't think it gets enough credit. Its main issue is just the screen being too small, so you can barely see anything, which is the same issue I have with the Super Mario Bros. Deluxe remake on the Game Boy Color. If the screen was like 1.5 to 2 times the size, it would be so much better, but that's just the limitations of the Game Boy. The main Mario game on the Wii U, New Super Mario Bros. U is the 4th and final game of the New Super Mario Bros. Series. At least, I hope it's the final game, otherwise I'm gonna have to make some phone calls.
911, what's your emergency?
Yes, I'd like to report a Japanese terrorist group going by the name Nintendo. Now, you may say, how can I have this game below New Super Mario Bros. Wii when they're both essentially the same game, but Wii U has some improvements? Well, there's a couple reasons. For one, this game is significantly easier. Wii actually provided a challenge, and there were some really tough levels, while U is ass easy up until World 9, where there's a couple of challenging levels. But even still, World 9 is harder in Wii as well. And it also just copied all of Wii's bosses with the Koopalings again. It was fine in Wii, but why do it again? Nintendo has some balls doing this less than a year after already doing it again on the 3DS. Secondly, this game brought back Boom Boom, which seems cool in theory, and it was to see him back the first time. However, he is now in every fucking game, and I'm sick of seeing him. They Koopalingsified him, and I blame you for his return. And the third reason why Wii is better, I have a moral obligation to this series after that game, so I have to hate on you and 2. This game is still a lot of fun, the controls are just as good as always, and the level design is superb. They feel similar to Wii, but have enough differences to not feel like exact copies. I also like the addition of Baby Yoshis and their different uses, but I'm gonna be the one to say it. The Acorn suit is stupid and probably the worst signature power-up of any 2D Mario game. It just feels like they tried to make a new Cape Feather, but just worse. Just bring back the Cape Feather, you cowards! The final boss is also just a worse version of Wii's, and the giant Bowser shtick was old by this point. They should have made a Squirrel Bowser like they did with Cat Bowser, then I'd be on board. The deluxe version also gave us Peachette, which was one of their worst ideas, but it did give the community Bowsette, so I guess I can forgive you this time, Nintendo. Yes, I'm counting New Super Luigi U as a 2D Mario game. It got its own release and box, so it counts. Even though Mario isn't playable, so can you really count this as a Mario game? But shut up, let Luigi have this. The game is just New Super Mario Bros. U on crack, as Luigi has his floaty and slippery feel to make the platforming more difficult. The levels are also all speedruns with a 100-second time limit, which makes each level more stressful and hectic as you're always feeling rushed. It's fun, but as a game where there are secrets and items to collect, I don't want to feel like there's someone behind me to move at Mach speed. I try to 100% most games that I play, so this made it a little bit of an issue when I first tried to play this, but I definitely see the appeal of this over the original main game. This was also the first game to make Nabbit a playable character, which I have mixed feelings about. It was cool to see this random character from Mario U be playable, but also why the fuck is this random character from Mario U playable? Especially since he's the most bullshit character in the game and he can never take damage and doesn't use power-ups and instead gains lives for collecting them. It makes one player entirely overpowered over the others and is only useful for a toddler who doesn't know how to play games. They deserve to suffer like the rest of us. I never thought I'd say this, but why the hell couldn't they have just given us a third colored Toad? The results are back here, and I'm sorry to say, but you're clinically insane. Tell me something I don't know. I have to keep Wii right next to the U games as they are basically all the same. Now you may counter that and say why aren't the DS and 3DS games next to each other if that's the case. They have way more differences, which we will get to. This was the first 4-player made Mario game and is still the best of its kind. Aside from 3D World, but that doesn't count, it's a 3D game. The wackiness is something that makes the experience of the game. This is one of those games that's fun on your own, but is taken to a whole nother level when you play with someone else. There are some things that clearly weren't perfected being the first 4-player game, but that adds to the experience and the bullshittery. And now we're talking about the fun kind of bullshit, unlike Lost Levels. The new power-ups were all good additions and added something we hadn't had before. Like, sure, we had flying with the Cape Feather, but the propellers added a different kind of flying with being able to go straight up and reach high places. The Ice Flower was a great contrast to the Fire Flower, and the Penguin suit made ice physics finally bearable. As someone who lives in Wisconsin, I wish this was a real thing. I would pay Nintendo an absurd amount of money to be able to put this on my tires. The final boss was a really cool surprise and was the first of its its kind with Bowser turning giant and having an escape sequence. I remember literally jumping out of my seat when Bowser came flying up from the bottom of the screen. This was the first game to bring the Koopalings back, which was cool until they came back in every game afterwards, which is why I blame this game for their overuse just like I blame you for Boom Boom. Maybe I'm just an old head who likes the original, but I just get more enjoyment out of playing this over you. Say I'm biased all you want, but this is my list, so deal with it. Before you dislike this video for not having Mario Bros. 3 in the top 3, please hear me out. I regret nothing! This game is tons of fun and by far the best Mario game on the NES. It provided such creative and well-designed levels that had never been seen before and was the first to introduce a world map, which has become a staple in every game. The art style is beautiful, and a lot of times I forget this was an NES game and think it was a Super Nintendo game. That's how good it looks. The power-ups introduced are some that haven't appeared as often as others, but they were all great additions. Raccoon and Tanuki Mario are 10 times better than Squirrel Mario to allow you to fly. You could even kinda consider the Tanuki suit the introduction of the ground pound, which has become one of Mario's most iconic moves. I know it's a bit different, but technically you are jumping and slamming down to crush enemies, so it's essentially the same thing. Mark me down for the first person to ever say that. We also got the frog suit, which made water levels actually bearable. I mean, just look at him. Peak power-up design right there. And the hammer suit is one that shocks me we haven't seen in other games. 3D World even went out of their way to create a boomerang flower, but just ignored the hammer suit. Now, why is this game only number 5? Because the games above are better. I mean, it's not rocket science. Don't get me wrong, if you have this at the top of your list, I wouldn't be mad at you. But for me, it just falls a bit short, and also the final boss is stupid. Making Bowser break the blocks below you is way too easy and feels like just a waiting game. Or you could just shoot him with fireballs and win in 10 seconds. Too many of the early game's bosses are cakewalks like this and just takes away from the moment of it being the final boss. This is why I like the RPGs more, as the fights actually make me sweat a little. Or in some cases, sweat a bit more than a little. I'm willing to bet a lot of you expected this game to be at number 1, and there's a good argument for it to be there. This game is one of the most gorgeous sprite-based games out there and one of the most iconic games too. This was the first 2D Mario game I ever played, as my first console was a Nintendo 64, but my neighbors had a Super Nintendo, which we played this and Super Mario Kart together. I remember even thinking as a kid that this game looked better than Mario 64, and I still think that, and it holds up better visually than any Mario game before 2000. I love that this game takes you to a new area called Dinosaur Land, which again makes me a bit biased because I was that one kid that was obsessed with dinosaurs that your parents try to steer you clear of. This makes many of the levels extremely pleasing to me, especially the dinosaur enemies, and the best dinosaur, Yoshi, made his Mario debut in this game. Being able to ride around on him along with the cape feather and spin jumps make for one of the most satisfying controls and level design of any game to date. And you can always drop Yoshi into a pit to save your life if you hate animals. I will do what I must. The game introduced the Star Road like World 9 and Star World in later games, with harder levels and sort of a shortcut between the worlds. These still provide a challenge to me and are some of the best designed levels in the whole game. Whole game in general connects seamlessly together, and I love how the world map is all interconnected. I've talked about this before in other games, but I don't like when a game just jumps from one area to another with no real connection. Like, how is a desert world right next to a frozen world, which is right next to a water world, and I could continue for 4 more worlds after that? Mario World has everything work together to create one overall world, which is so much better and immersive. That being said, the Forest of Illusion can go f itself and is the worst world in any 2D Mario game. I still get lost in these levels every time I play it, and normally I like it when a game doesn't tell you what to do, but there are no hints or even general clues to figure out what to do. The final boss is still Bowser, but they made the fight unique, and not stupid slamming through blocks unique. It's one of the better 2D Bowser fights out there in my opinion. Honestly, the top 4 games in this list, or even 5, could really be in any order depending on your opinion. But for me, this is number 4. Now time to prepare my will as the angry mob tries to break down my door for these last 2 entries. Call me a nostalgic bitch or call me whatever you want, but New Super Mario Bros. On the DS is legitimately one of the best 2D Mario games ever made. It did also start the New Super Mario Bros. Series, so maybe I should knock it further, but it introduced so many positive things I can look past that. The blue shell is a power-up that should be brought back. We really need more power-ups to let you act like different enemies. We have one for Hammer Bros that still hasn't been brought back for some reason. We have a Koopa, Fire Bros, Boomerang Bros, and now I just need one to play as a Shy Guy. The Mega and Mini Mushrooms provided a new way to experience levels and design secrets around, which was unheard of before. Yes, the Mega Mushroom was a major gimmick to sell the game, and it worked and made 9-year-old me scream in joy. The Mini Mushroom gave you a floaty feel and feel like Jesus walking across the water. And in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. Big whoop, so has Mario. They also hid World 4 and 7 behind the mini mushroom, which was a nice challenge to have to beat the boss of those worlds with it, but also it's stupid, why did they do that? Speaking of bosses, that is what sets this game apart from many games before this. Every world has a unique boss at the end, which represents that area and are so much more creative than just fighting a Koopaling or Bowser again. They gave us a Mummy Pokey, Giant Goomba, Petey Piranha, a Lakitu shooting lightning, and a Monty Mole in a tank. Look me in the face and tell me this isn't the greatest 2D Mario boss ever made. I also love how they make Bowser the first boss just to have him get melted into bones, then fight Dry Bowser before he's revived, and then he's giant as the final boss and you fight him with Bowser Jr. at the same time. Best assortment of bosses in any 2D Mario game, besides maybe number 1 on this list, but we'll get to that. Plus, how can we forget about the minigames the game has as a side mode? They are just direct copies of the minigames from Super Mario 64 DS, but that doesn't make them any less fun, and they add so much more replay value to any game before it. And there's a multiplayer mode to compete to collect stars in 5 stages, which makes this the first game to have simultaneous multiplayer gameplay. You guys are lucky I'm only putting this at number 3, because the more and more I think about this, I want to put it even higher on the list. I'm gonna limit myself though, because the next 2 games on this list are incredible, and I can't convince myself to drop either of them out of the top 2. Now, the newest game on this list, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, is number 2 on my list. Now, you may call me a prisoner of the moment and say I'm biased just because it's new, but when have I ever done that before? What about this? Or this? Or this? Alright, you got me there. But even with this game being so new, I genuinely believe it's one of the best 2D Mario games ever made. It took everything that made the previous games great and expanded and improved upon on nearly every one of them. The new power-ups added were great additions and helped create some really cool levels. The Bubble Flower is probably my least favorite, but the drill was so useful for secrets, and being able to dig on ceilings of caves made it even better. And then most importantly, we got the elephant power-up, which makes me indescribably happy. Elephants are one of my favorite animals, and getting to play as them was a dream, and every character looks so goofy. I love it. And it made us find out that Bowser likes his girls thick, which made me gain even more respect for him. The map connects super well, although I wish there weren't loading zones from the center to each world to make it really feel like one giant map. I get that that would be harder to have everything loaded in all at once, but it would have made everything feel more cohesive. The levels as a whole are the most fun platforming levels I've played in a long time, and the Wonder Flowers create the craziest experiences that make you feel like you're on drugs, and who doesn't love that? I'm busy. The addition of badges makes up for only 4 power-ups, and they give you so many abilities and so many options for how you like to play. There's no limit on what you can do, and that makes for the most satisfying and easy to understand game mechanics of any game. And then the addition of smaller challenge levels to give you a break from the main levels gives a level of variety needed to not make the game feel too repetitive. My only complaint is that the world bosses should have been more unique. Why is it always Bowser Jr.? It's like they used up all of their creativity on the level design and then realized at the last second, we finally finished the game. Oh shit, we never added any bosses. Someone throw Bowser Jr. in there, nobody will notice. This is what happens when you give developers as much time as needed to fully optimize their work and not restrict their creativity. The Zelda developers did it with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and now Mario is too, which gives me hope for every game moving forward. But this just makes me hate Game Freak even more for trying to release a new Pokemon game every fucking year. Just take your time and maybe the game won't look like a GameCube game and instead look like a Wii game. And to top the list, we have the game that some of you might not even count as a 2D Mario game, but the title technically is Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, so I think it should count. You may ask then, why is Super Mario Land 3 not counted? That's because that's a subtitle of the game and Wario Land is the main title, so I'm not counting it. But if you really want me to put it on the list, just slot it in right after Mario Land 2, they're pretty comparable. Back to Yoshi's Island, I fully believe this is the best 2D Mario game by a long shot, and it is my favorite game on the Super Nintendo. The level design feels so much different than every other game on this list, which might be because the movement is completely different by controlling Yoshi instead of Mario. Getting to throw eggs and flutter jump provides a unique take on attacking and solving puzzles. The platforming isn't easy, and the enemies you encounter are unlike anything in any game before or since. Aside from lost levels, this is without a doubt the hardest game on this list, which I think is why I love it so much. Yoshi has different transformations as well, which gives more variety to the level design. Instead of just throwing Yoshi into the ocean, he turns into a submarine. How can anyone say this isn't the greatest thing they've ever seen? Oh, that's right, I did show you a Monty Mole in a tank, so second greatest thing you've ever seen. The levels have so many secrets to collect and find, which makes the game have ton of replay value and gives an extended game time over the shorter games before it. The extra levels are incredible, and also these introduced Poochie. How can you try and say that a game that was the first to let you play as Yoshi and introduce this adorable dog isn't the greatest Mario game ever made? You can't! It's perfect! Each world has a variety of levels that make you not get bored of the same style style of level over and over, but they don't feel like they don't connect in any way. The game overall is gorgeous, just like Mario World, and the music is maybe the best in the entire series. And most importantly, above all else, the bosses in the game are actually unique. Are they mostly just larger versions of basic enemies? Yes. Is that still better than the Koopaling 70,000 times? By a mile, yes! I love these bosses, and they don't feel like color swap versions of the same fight for each world. Each has a unique style and fight that requires you to figure out their weakness. This was also Raphael the Raven's first appearance, so that's enough reason right there to say these bosses are the best. But better than all of the world bosses is the final boss. Baby Bowser being turned into a Goliath version of himself and throwing eggs miles off into the background with the perception of him running towards you with the most ominous and hype music ever in the background is the perfect culmination of fancy words I can use to describe how amazing this fight is. There is nothing that can compare to this fight to me, and without a doubt, this game is the best of all of the 2D Mario games ever made. It hits every box and is what every 2D game should strive to be. And to add to that, it was the third game I ever played with my neighbor as a kid on their Super Nintendo, so I'm extremely biased to it. Wouldn't be a video of mine without being completely biased. Hopefully I didn't make too many of you mad, but if I did, you could always try and bribe me to change my opinion, but just so you know, I'm not a sellout, so it may take a lot to change my opinions. Here's $10. The NES Mario games are the best!